December 7th, 1941, 7:02 in the morning. Two Army privates sitting at an SCR-270 mobile radar set in Opana Point, northern Oahu, watched the largest return signal either of them have ever seen crawl across their oscilloscope screen. 183 aircraft, 130 miles out, bearing 3 degrees north. They call it in. The officer who takes the call, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler, has almost no radar training, assumes the blip is a flight of friendly B-17s scheduled to arrive from the mainland, and tells them not to worry about it. 3 hours later, 6 battleships are sunk or sinking, and more than 2,400 Americans are dead or dying. But let's change one thing. What if the radar watching that horizon wasn't a piece of experimental 1941 technology run by two privates who happened to stay late? What if Pearl Harbor was defended by modern radar, the kind that doesn't need a human to interpret an oscilloscope, the kind that already knows what it's looking at before the operator does? The SCR-270 that sat on Opana Point was, by the standards of its era, a genuine technological achievement. It could detect large formations of aircraft at roughly 150 miles under good conditions, but detecting something and understanding it are entirely different problems. The SCR-270 produced a raw signal return on a cathode ray tube. No target classification, no altitude readout with meaningful precision, no automatic tracking, no threat identification. An operator looked at a spike on a screen and made a judgment call. The entire American early warning system in Oahu in December of 1941 was built around that judgment call made by men who had been trained for weeks rather than years, feeding reports into a command structure that had no established protocol for acting on them. The technology existed, the integration around it had barely begun. Modern radar operates on principles that would make the SCR-270's designers stare in silence. The Lockheed Martin TPY-4, as one example of what a hardened installation radar looks like today, uses an active electronically scanned array with gallium nitride transmitter technology. It runs multiple tracking and identification missions simultaneously across the same aperture. It doesn't wait for an operator to read a spike. It processes digital returns in real time, assigns tracks automatically, computes bearing, range, altitude, and velocity for every detected contact, and begins classifying threats before a human has looked at the screen. The difference between this and the Opana Point setup isn't one generation of improvement, it's closer to the difference between a signal fire and a fiber optic cable. The Japanese strike force that morning launched from 6 fleet carriers positioned 230 miles north of Oahu. Modern naval perimeter radar, the kind that would realistically accompany a defended installation of Pearl Harbor's strategic importance, detects and tracks surface vessels at ranges well beyond that. The carrier task force, designated Kido Butai, 30 warships maintaining radio silence and moving at roughly 24 knots, is a significant radar target. It wouldn't have arrived unannounced. A modern installation on Oahu picks up the formation somewhere between 250 and 350 miles out, hours before the first aircraft leaves the flight deck. That's not a small margin. That's enough time to change the entire shape of the day. Assume the detection happens at 300 miles. The time is somewhere around 4:30 in the morning. Automatic threat classification algorithms are already analyzing radar cross-section returns, comparing them against known surface contact signatures. A formation of 30 warships moving on a direct heading toward a major naval installation at speed in the pre-dawn hours triggers every alert threshold the system has. The watch officer doesn't receive a phone call from a private asking whether he should be concerned. He receives an automatically generated threat report with bearing, range, track history, and recommended response options. The decision chain that failed catastrophically in the real timeline doesn't fail here because it isn't the decision chain that acts first. The system escalates automatically. By 5 a.m., the fleet is sortied or dispersing. Battleship Row has exactly the vulnerability it has because the ships are sitting stationary, packed into a tight anchorage, with their hulls presenting stable, flat-sided profiles to incoming torpedo bombers. A ship underway at 20 knots in open water is a fundamentally different target. The torpedo runs the Japanese aviators practiced for months, perfected specifically for the shallow draft conditions of Pearl Harbor, are designed around stationary ships in an enclosed anchorage. None of those calculations or survive contact with a moving fleet in an open ocean. The moment the battleships are underway, the tactical calculus for every torpedo bomber in the first wave changes dramatically, and not in Japan's favor. The first wave launches at approximately 6 a.m. 183 aircraft, a mixture of Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, and Mitsubishi A-6M Zero fighters flying escort. In the real attack, this formation crosses 200 130 miles of open ocean and arrives over Oahu essentially uncontested. Modern radar has been tracking the individual aircraft since they cleared 120 miles from the carriers, not as a large return that requires interpretation, as individually resolved tracks. Pulse Doppler processing separates the aircraft by velocity and radar cross-section. The system classifies them by type. The targeting geometry for a fighter intercept is already computed and queued before the scramble order clears the command post. The P-40 Warhawks and P-36 Hawks sitting on Wheeler and Hickam in the real timeline are caught on the ground in neat rows, wingtip to wingtip, easy targets for strafing Zeros. Here, they're already airborne. 30 minutes of warning is enough to get fighters into the air. An hour of warning is enough to have them positioned for a head-on intercept over open water 60 miles north of the island before the first bomb has any chance of finding a target. The Zero is a superb dogfighter at low and medium altitude with a skilled pilot behind the controls, but it carries no armor, its fuel tanks are unprotected, and it burns at 20mm cannon range with efficient regularity. A prepared American fighter force, warned, positioned, and attacking first, is a different opponent than one of the Japanese encountered in the real morning. The second wave comes an hour later, 167 more aircraft. By the time these aircraft are approaching radar coverage, the first wave has already been engaged, degraded, and partially turned back. The Japanese strike commander, Mitsuo Fuchida, flying with the first wave, doesn't transmit his famous Tora 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 signal. There's no complete surprise to report. The second wave arrives into an organized defense, anti-aircraft batteries manned and tracking, fighters vectored by radar-controlled ground intercept, fleet units dispersed and presenting no clean anchorage targets. The operation's entire architecture collapses because it was built on one assumption, that nobody would see them coming. Modern IFF systems eliminate the specific failure point that Tyler represented. In 1941, there was no reliable technical method to determine whether an incoming radar contact was hostile or friendly. A large return could be B-17s. It could be Japanese attackers. A fatigued officer with minimal training made a guess. Modern military radar installations use identification, friend or foe transponder interrogation automatically. Every aircraft in the sky either responds with the correct coded signal or it doesn't. No response, wrong response, or no transponder at all immediately classifies the contact as unknown and hostile. There is no version of a modern IFF-equipped installation where 183 Japanese aircraft cross 130 miles of tracked airspace and get waved off because someone thought they might be friendly transports. The anti-aircraft picture changes too. In the real attack, most of the gun crews weren't at their stations when the bombs started falling. Ammunition lockers were locked. Some crews had to break in to access their shells. There are Lacan 20mm guns, the 1.1-inch quad mounts, the 5-inch anti-aircraft batteries. All of them were either unmanned or in the process of being manned when they were most needed. Hours of warning produced by modern radar means every crew is at battle stations. Every locker is open. Firing solutions are being computed before a Japanese aircraft is visible to the naked eye from the harbor's edge. The anti-aircraft environment the attackers fly into is categorically different from the one they exploited in the real December morning. The deeper question is, what happens to the Pacific War if December 7th simply fails? The Japanese strategic plan was built around a decisive blow that would destroy American naval power in the Pacific and create enough time and space to consolidate control over Southeast Asian resources before the United States could rebuild and respond. Kido Butai burning the Pacific Fleet at its moorings was supposed to buy 18 months. If the attack fails or lands at a fraction of its intended weight, Japan's timeline collapses. The carriers that were absent from Pearl Harbor that day, Lexington, Enterprise, Saratoga, remain the most powerful naval assets in the Pacific. And now the battleships haven't been touched either. The force ratio that Japan needed to exploit never materializes. The diplomatic situation shifts as well. A failed attack that the United States detected, tracked, and partially defeated with its own technology carries different political meaning than the catastrophe of the real history. The shock and the fury that unified American public opinion and dissolved every isolationist argument overnight doesn't disappear entirely, but its character changes. Japan attacked. The United States defended. The moral clarity remains, but the material damage, the 2,403 dead, the 21 ships damaged or sunk, the 188 aircraft destroyed, the psychological weight of the most one-sided surprise attack in American military history, none of that accumulates in the same way. The Pacific campaign likely still begins. The ending is probably similar, but the path between those 2 points looks very different when the attack that was supposed to open the war instead becomes the attack that failed before it finished. The 2 privates at Opana Point did everything they were supposed to do. They detected the raid, they reported it. The system around them was the problem, not the radar, and not the men watching it. A modern installation doesn't depend on 2 men staying late and 1 officer making the right interpretation under uncertainty. The detection is automatic. The classification is automatic. The alerting is automatic. The entire sequence that collapsed on December 7th, 1941, from contact to command to response, gets replaced by a system that doesn't sleep, doesn't guess, and doesn't assume the large formation approaching at 7:02 in the morning is is probably nothing to worry about.